What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Brandon Pfaadt struggles in his spring training start. Biggest risers and fallers from the new top 30 D-backs prospects list. And how did Arizona become the biggest challengers to the Dodgers in the NL West?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my photos to my articles and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, please follow me on Twitter at CreatorThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked on Diamondbacks on both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. On today's show, we're going to be discussing Brandon Pfaadt's struggles in his spring training start, talking about the new top 30 prospect list for the D-backs, the biggest risers and fallers. Where is Druw Jones? And then how did the D-backs become the biggest challengers to the LA Dodgers in the NL West? We're discussing all that on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. One of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. Let's get into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's discuss today's spring training game, Wednesday's spring training game against the San Francisco Giants. We were supposed to talk to Ben Kaspick of Locked on Giants today. It did not happen. Hopefully, he hops on the podcast tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. But this was a game where the D-backs lose 11-5, and their pitching was not very good. Brandon Pfaadt started this game. We know he's battling for a spot in that rotation. We all want Pfaadt to be that number 5 starter. I think he was the best starter for the D-backs in the first half last season, struggled in the second half, but is definitely someone that seems poised for a breakout season if given the opportunity to start in the rotation. And I'm just a little bit nervous that maybe Pfaadt is putting too much pressure on himself this spring training. As we saw with his start today, looked a little bit uncharacteristic, couldn't get out the second inning, threw a ton of pitches, and was just an overall bad Brandon Pfaadt start. And I always say we don't want to play the results in spring training, but when it comes to the rotation and the starters, Troy Lavello is going to evaluate every start. He says it all matters. And with Jordan Montgomery making his debut this week, potentially, like a start like this hurts Brandon Pfaadt in terms of his chances of making it to the rotation. Erod is still owed a few years, around $20 million a year. Monty's getting $20+ million this year. Like, if Pfaadt wants to make it to the rotation, he's going to have to perform well this spring training. And he's still someone that's in the D-backs plans for the future. Like, Pfaadt has mid-rotation to frontline starter over the next 5 to 7 years written all over his resume, or potential resume, for the D-backs in the future. But as it currently stands, D-backs keep saying they're going winning over development. And if they think the other options are better than Pfaadt right now, then Pfaadt might not make this D-backs starting rotation, which sounds crazy to think about considering he was the D-backs number 3 starter in the World Series just a couple years ago. But when you have 7 starters vying for 5 spots, it makes competition so much tougher. And Pfaadt has talked about how these spring training results like kind of matter. And like usually in spring training, you don't care as much. You're just trying to work on things. But he's acknowledged how there's real competition this spring training. And as much as you don't want to care about the results as much in exhibition games, they are still sitting in the back of his head. So for Pfaadt, I just want him to not put as much pressure on himself, because I think he's at his best when he doesn't feel pressure, right? When you've looked at Brandon Pfaadt in those big postseason games against the Dodgers, the Phillies, the thing that was craziest about Brandon Pfaadt was his demeanor, his poise, going to those big raucous crowds, going to Philadelphia and shun them down on the road. Like, that was so tough. And so I feel like there's way more pressure that Pfaadt's putting on himself right now in spring training than he even did during those postseason runs. So for Pfaadt, don't play with any pressure because I think you're at your best when you don't realize there's pressure around you. I think he's a big game performer. And so again, this is just spring training. So let's not put any pressure on yourself. And then I want to talk a little bit about Gabby Moreno because he had himself a good game. He had himself his first home run of spring training. And Moreno is someone that has talked this spring training about being more consistent offensively. We've seen the flashes from Moreno. Last season, he started the year pretty slow, but in his 33 games prior to getting hurt and missing 6 weeks, he batted .312 at an .878 OPS. And in a lot of those games, he was batting second in this Dbacks lineup. We've seen him have stretches where he seems like he has stretches where he seems like could be a real impact offensive piece, especially as a catcher. Not saying he's going to be Buster Posey, but can he be in like that tier 2, tier 3 of really good offensive catcher? The bat's .290. 780 OPS. The biggest issue for him right now, doesn't have a ton of power, but in terms of that consistent contact ability and just putting the ball in play, like, yeah, Gabriel Moreno can at least be what Jake McCarthy was last season, which was a super effective guy at the plate, singles, doubles, and coming through in the clutch. Moreno and Jake McCarthy could be like the same type of player from different sides of the plate if Moreno can be more consistent game to game. And he's talked about how he's worked on building up the strength in his legs to help with his consistency and just finding that balance when he's at the plate and just looking for the type of pitch that he wants to hit, not trying to chase anything, not trying to pull the ball like last year. He did too much of that in the first half. He just wants to take what the pitcher gives him. And I think because of that, we're going to see a much improved Gabriel Moreno entering next season. Same with Jake McCarthy. Both of these guys are trying to work on becoming more complete players. Jake McCarthy has talked a ton this spring training as well about becoming a more all-around offensive player and also more all-around defensive player. Jake McCarthy has talked about tapping into more power, having a little bit more exit velocity. And so seeing him come off the season he just had, knowing Moreno has had flashes and knowing he wants to get better, like both Jake McCarthy and Gabriel Moreno are guys who have been very good so far in their young careers, but definitely have some flaws and maybe similar flaws. Both of them are high contact, put the ball in play, good approach, good plate discipline, but neither one of those guys have like wow offensive production. Neither one of those guys is hitting 20 to 30 home runs and batting like .315 as it currently stands. Both of them could be high average guys, but they don't feel like super dynamic offensive players in terms of the extra base hits, in terms of the power. So for both of these players, if they could get more consistent from game 1 to game 162 and tap into some power, because both of those players are kind of saying the same thing in terms of how they want to be as all-around players enter next season. They want to improve offensively. They want to tap into some more power and, of course, always be great defensively. Moreno and Jake McCarthy, I think, are kind of in the same bucket in terms of their player profile right now as offensive players and the way that they want to improve and the way that they attack the game. I love the work ethic of both of these guys. And so for Moreno, I expect him to have a potential monster offensive season last year. If what he did prior to his injury, those 33 games, if he can replicate that over a larger sample size, that is a real major offensive piece and one of the best offensive catchers in Major League Baseball. And if Jake McCarthy can just replicate what he did in 2024 while getting better at defense, while tapping into some power and adding some more exit velocity on his plate, watch out for this D-backs offense if they get some internal development from some guys like Gabriel Moreno and Jake McCarthy. Now we'll discuss the biggest risers and fallers and where Druw Jones is on the new D-backs top 30 prospect list in segment number 2. And if you're looking to buy tickets to an upcoming sport or an event, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Times, because Game Time is the best place for last minute deals on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have this feature called all-in pricing. When you toggle this feature on, it shows you your total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You could get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Back here on the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, and now let's discuss the biggest risers and fallers on the new Dbacks top 30 prospect list provided by MLB Pipeline, because there were a couple names where I was like, oh, they fell a little bit, and there was a couple names where it's like, whoa, that guy is high on the new top 30 list for the D-backs. Of course, Jordan Lawler still holding down number one, as he should be, because the biggest issue for him right now is just health. When he's played on the minor league level, he's been a stud. You look at his numbers so far, his career numbers in the minor leagues: 294 average, 893 OPS. The issue is he just does not play a lot of games. But when he's healthy, he's been a stud for the D-backs in the minor league. So he deserves to be number one. But the first biggest riser on our list, Dmitrio Crisantes, who is 20 years of age, who is not expected to debut until 2027, was nowhere near this high on the list last year. Of course, he is now number 2 on the D-backs list. He was number 13 to end 2024, now number 2 infielder, high A. And the reason is he just absolutely crushed in terms of average and OPS last year. Like, some of these guys, you don't have to look very deep into the numbers to know why they were ranked so high. A 341 average and a 921 OPS in the minor leagues last year, had a monster season with 30 stolen bases. He's a guy that people really believe in his hitting tool. He's a righty. He's got a little leg kick that people think he can translate to major league level as a high average guy with some decent pop that can just not make many mistakes at the plate. He's not considered like a high strikeout guy, good plate discipline, good contact ability, and just like a good offensive player with some pop. Maybe like something along the lines of like a Lourdes Gurriel. Like, I'm just throwing out comparisons, but he's considered like a pretty translatable player on the next level. His biggest issue is probably his defense, maybe lack of arm strength, because he's had some elbow issues in his past. But this is a guy, if he's been able to stay healthy, he's been able to build up that arm strength. If they think his arm is going to be fine, his elbow is going to be fine, this is a guy that could play kind of all over the infield defensively. And with the bat tool that he has, if his defense continues to improve, this could be a guy that we see on the major league level in a few seasons. Again, 2027, couple years away. We'll see what happens with the Lawlers and the Perdomos. Maybe he could still be a DH, this guy Crisantes, or just be a trade chip. But number 2 on the top 30 prospect list, watch out for Dmitrio Crisantes. This upcoming year probably will be in Double-A. If he has another season where he hits around 340, then yeah, that's a legit D-backs prospect that we have to keep on our radar. 2 guys that moved up to number 4 and number 5 after being more like closer to the teens last year. I mean, Gilbert Diaz, he was number 6 in 2024. Now he's number 4, so he didn't move up a lot. But the number 5 guy did, I will say. Adrian Del Castillo. He goes from number 14 to now number 5 in the top 30 D-backs prospect list. Not surprised to see Gilbert Diaz moved up, because he had a little stint with Arizona last year on the major league level. It looked good, a 3.81 ERA. He started 4 games, finished the game like he was a starter. He was a reliever. He came in a really critical point of the season in the middle of the year when the D-backs were dealing with so many injuries, and we're just trying to stay alive in the playoff race. Gilbert Diaz came in and really held it down for the D-backs. Can throw over 95 miles per hour on his fastball with some good off-speed pitches to work off of it as well. He can even touch like 99 at his very, very best with a little slider to work off of it as well. Like, I think Diaz is really good. He's an athletic pitcher as well. He's a pretty big guy, standing at 6 foot, maybe not a massive guy, but he's at least a little tall, a little slender, still super young, only 24 years of age. And the fact that he could throw 95 to 97 pretty consistently with potential to throw a little bit harder. And we've already seen him be productive on the major league level. I like Gilbert Diaz a lot. I don't know how he fits right now with 7 guys in the D-backs rotation, plus guys like Jameson, Bryce Jarvis, Christian Mena, like so many pitchers, but Gilbert Diaz at the very least could be a very interesting trade chip going forward. Adrian Del Castillo at number 5, huge riser. He is one of my D-backs players to watch and keep an eye on entering 2025 because, like I said on yesterday's podcast, there's a world where Pavin Smith, the sample size we saw in 2024, does not translate in 2025. We see more of the career that we've seen from Pavin Smith so far, where he's just not a very good offensive player, average, power. Like he's got good play discipline, but just not dynamic at all. And then the defense is also a struggle. So if he is just like a 0 as a player, why not put in Adrian Del Castillo as your lefty DH to replace the Jock Peterson, Pavin Smith role? I think Del Castillo, with what we saw him do offensively on the major league level last year, knowing what he did offensively in the minors last season, and people really believe in his at bat, I think Adrian Del Castillo is a guy to watch out for as the lefty DH for the D-backs if it does not work out for Pavin Smith. So I love ADC at number 5. And then the D-backs, biggest faller, sadly, is probably going to be Druw Jones, who was number 2 to end 2024. Still a guy with tantalizing talent, but now at number 7. And just like Jordan Lawler, he just needs to stay healthy. He just doesn't play enough games. He spent last season in Visalia, and he was solid last year, a 275 average, 814 OPS. He runs really well. The defense is elite. Like the talent's still there with Druw Jones. He needs to stay healthy and put it all together, show a little bit more at the plate. He strikes out a ton. Like he's a super raw prospect, but you can still see the reasons why people love Druw Jones. You can still see some of that raw power. You can still see the defense. You can still see the athleticism when he runs around the bases. Like Druw Jones is still only 21 years of age. Give this guy a couple more years. He's 6'4" and only weighs 180. Like as that guy starts to fill out, puts on more power, gets a little bit better at the plate as he sees more pitches, gets a little bit more comfortable. Like I still believe in the talent of Druw Jones a lot, and I still think he could be a part of this D-backs future. And his ETA, just like Demetrio Cristante, is 2027. So we're still a couple years away before we even need to see Druw Jones. Then Tommy Troy, he was like the hottest prospect probably entering 2024 after the season he had in 2023. Disappointed last year. He drops down to number 8, right behind Druw Jones in the prospect ranking. He had a 271 average, 843 OPS in 2023. That's why he was so highly touted. Last season, regression to the mean, 234 average and a 681 OPS in the minor leagues. We'll see if Tommy Troy could look a little bit better in 2025, but he was someone that got a lot of people intrigued. A lot of people were talking about Tommy Troy entering last season and not a lot of discussion about him entering 2025. So he is someone that could use a big bounce back entering next season. Now we'll discuss how the D-backs became the Dodgers' biggest challengers in the NL West in segment number 3. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. My favorite Wonderful Pistachios I actually have right here. Sorry to the audio listeners only. You're going to have to go to YouTube for this one because right next to me, I got 3 of my favorite flavors here. And this is what is great about Wonderful Pistachios. Unsalted right here, no shell. Chili roasted, no shell. And then this one is roasted and salted with the shell. The great thing about Wonderful Pistachios is the variety. You could get salted, unsalted, with shell, no shell. Get a little kick to it if you wanted to. No matter what flavor you want, they have a variety and a profile that fits just for you. So please go get yourself some wonderful pistachios, get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Welcome back to the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And now I want to do a fun topic, a fun exercise, basically just laying out the plan of how the Dbacks, since I've taken over this podcast in 2020, I took over the COVID shortened season, how the Dbacks from that time, because after 2020, they entered 2021 and they have that all-time bad season, right? 52 wins, over 100 and something losses, right? Like 110 losses, like all-time bad season. One of the worst seasons in Major League history for any ball club. They are dead last in the NL West in 2021. And since then, the D-backs have become maybe the model franchise in Major League Baseball and probably the biggest challengers in the NL West to the LA Dodgers and maybe in the National League. The Padres, you could say as well. But guess what? Between the Dodgers and Padres, I've only seen one of those teams in recent memory knock out the Dodgers in the postseason. And so I'm giving the D-backs the nod as the biggest challengers to the Dodgers in the NL West. And how did a team that lost over 100 games in 2021 get to this scenario? How did the D-backs turn it around? Because you look at 2021, the Dodgers and Giants both won over 100 games. And of course, the Dodgers win over 100 games like every single season. But the Giants were the biggest surprise that season. They won like 107 games, if you remember this. And we all looked at that team on paper and we were like, how did this talent produce this many wins? So you felt great about the Giants as a franchise. The Padres, they didn't make the playoffs, but they were a borderline 500 team with 79 wins. And you still had Machado, you had Fernando Tatis. Like they were a team on the rise. And then even a team like the Rockies weren't even that bad in 2021. 74-win team, and the talent on paper, honestly, not that bad. And so when you look at where the division was a few years ago in 2021, we had 200-win teams, another team, the Padres, who were basically 500 and on the rise, then a Rockies team who was not even bad, at least frisky, a 74-win Rockies team. Like Rockies fans would beg for a 74-win season at this point. And so how did the D-backs flip the whole division on its head outside the Dodgers? Well, the Giants, they've regressed back in a big way, right? We all knew that 107-win team was a huge fluke when we looked at that talent on paper. And since then, the Giants haven't been able to hit on any big-time free agents. They tried to go get Aaron Judge, big whiff, of course. They even tried to get Carlos Correa, and his knee was so bad, even the Giants had to walk away. And I don't know why they didn't go out there and get a guy like Pete Alonso, but every time they seem to be in the market for like the top free agent, they don't get him. Then they spend their money, I think, weirdly on like other vets like Michael Conforto, JD Davis. Let's go spend a bag on Jorge Soler. Like, this is the first offseason where I'm like, okay, like you probably overspent on Willy Adames, but at least I like Willy Adames as a player. In the past, I'm like, I would have liked any team that added Jung Ho Lee. I would have proved that decision. But the fact that the Giants gave Jung Ho Lee like the largest contract ever at the time for like a Asian born player or like an international signing, like $100 million for Jung Ho Lee, who he hadn't seen at the time. Like it was insane, the money that they gave him. And I just think the way that they've spent their money the past few free agencies outside of this past year, not very smart at all. And then the fact that they spend money on guys that I didn't like, but then also let guys like Kevin Gausman, Carlos Rodon, Blake Snell all walk out the door. Like just very bad financial decision-making by the San Francisco Giants over the last few years. The Colorado Rockies have become a disaster by trading away their best players for nothing. They also let Trevor Story walk for nothing. They let Elias Diaz, who was their all-star, just cut him, just let him go. Brendan Rodgers, who was their top prospect for years, who was never able to develop, but is he that bad? Or are you really just going to let him enter free agency and not bring him back? Like The Rockies have done nothing to add talent to their team except for Chris Bryant, who no one else wanted, that they spent a bag on, who hasn't been able to stay healthy, hasn't been able to be productive. Like, the Rockies organization have just made terrible decision after terrible decision in terms of roster construction. Meanwhile, keeping around Bud Black year after year while he has done absolutely nothing as a manager during his time in Major League Baseball. Like, insanity by the Colorado Rockies over the last few years. And now they are by far the worst team in the NL West. You look at the Padres, super talented team, but also it's like if Manny Machado continues to decline and if Bogarts never bounces back, like all of a sudden that's a really expensive team with some really long-term contracts that you probably can't get out of. Like, who wants to trade for 9 more years of Bogarts? Someone might want to trade for Machado, and then you look at his deal and you're like, man, Machado's gonna make like 40 million a year, like the last 7 years of his deal. Like, those are tough contracts to get out of. You Darvish is still getting a bag, and it's like the Padres are probably the biggest variance team in the NL West. Like, you can even tell me the Padres are going to win 95 games and knock out the Dodgers in the postseason. Like, they have enough talent to do that. But you can also tell me their stars continue to get worse. They're an expensive, unhappy team with no outs. Like, they are the biggest variance team in the NL West. And that's why the D-backs are the biggest challengers to the Dodgers in the division. And they've built themselves into that over the last few seasons since 2021. The Giants, Padres, and Rockies have all tried different tactics to build themselves into contenders. Maybe not the Rockies, but the Giants and Padres have. And none of them really have like sustainable rosters for the long term. Meanwhile, you look at the D-backs and they've done a great job of drafting, developing talent, making smart trades, making good signings, filling out the roster with stars and complementary pieces around the core that you built. D-backs can now look themselves in the mirror and say, it's the Dodgers, and then it's probably us in the NL West. Like, it's insane that the D-backs have become a model franchise in Major League Baseball. Their philosophies continue to evolve. They continue to look at new ways to build a contender, and I believe they are doing it the right way. In 2021, the D-backs were at rock bottom, and now the D-backs enter 2025 as the model franchise in Major League Baseball. I don't think any of us expected for Arizona ever to get here. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news, coverage, and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Deuces.